And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Empress Mars, who came back from his near-death experience with entities attached to him. Empress, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here. Really happy to meet you.
Well, I'm very happy to meet you. And if you don't mind, let's start on the day that this experience happened and go from there.
Okay, sure thing. I guess I'll set it up a little bit. Firstly, my near-death experience does involve me trying to take my own life. So I just want to let your viewers know that ahead of time as they're watching this episode. To set it up a little bit, a friend of mine was dating this dude and he had some addiction issues. I became friendly with him, and he had somehow come into possession of a vial of what I believe is lidocaine hydrochloride. He said that it was an experimental version of this that was being worked on at a university in Philadelphia, where I live. And he had sort of gotten hold of it, but he was afraid of what he would do with it because it's a euthanasia drug. And at the time I was in a pretty sober and solid place. So he asked me to hold on to it. And so I did. I took it from him so he wouldn't hurt himself that night. And I forgot I had it until a day many months later. And I'm a person who sort of has struggled with the ideation of self-harm my whole life based on my own personal history, which is a story for another time. But so this night came around and sort of the darkness came into my mind of wanting to hurt myself. And I took 3 times the fatal dose of this compound. And I then had just attempted to go to sleep. I was at a point in my life when I was pretty much done existing. I didn't want to be here anymore. And so I took the compound, went up the steps where I lived. I lived in a house at the time, and that's when things got weird. So I got to the top of my steps and was about to enter into my bedroom. My plan was just to go to sleep and be done with everything. There was a figure standing in the doorway to my bedroom. When I try to picture it, slightly taller than me, so maybe about 6 feet, it looks to my mind to be like a black shadow with vaguely purple tint, like that purple that's almost black, but sort of shiny. And that figure pushed me very hard, and I fell down the steps. I went flying. And I thought to myself, that was just so strange. I must have lost my footing. Strange. So I got back up, went back up the steps to go into my room. It happened a second time. I was pushed by this being that was suddenly there again, fell down the steps. And I started laughing actually because I just thought, this is so silly. Like what's happening? And I sort of had remembered that from other stories that you can lose control of your autonomic functions when you take something that's a fatal dose of a poison. So I thought maybe that's what was going on. But I also was like laughing because it just seems so absurd what was happening. And I was like, nobody would believe me. I was home alone. If I tried to tell somebody, I knew they wouldn't believe what was happening. So I go up the steps a third time, and this is when it gets even weirder because then I start to be flung around. It's not the same as just spasms because I was being lifted off of the ground. Then going back down the steps, there's sort of like, where the upstairs ends, there's like a wall as you walk down, pretty typical. Whatever was lifting me and throwing me around smashed my head a few times into this wall, and then threw me around the whole house. It started to fling me around the living room downstairs. Then I would get free from this for a while. I would go back upstairs, and then it flung me around the upstairs. And the way it was throwing me was kind of impossible. And that went on for maybe about an hour and a half. What it feels like could be like an hour and a half of just being flung, hurt, hit. My roommate at the time had a bike that was at the bottom of the steps, and it threw me like between the wall and the bike. I was just falling in ways that were impossible. If I was losing my bodily control, I wouldn't be being flung in these specific ways. Towards the end of this, I was thrown down the steps again. This time, there was a tunnel that I started to go through, and my body actually did a spiral as it fell down the stairs. So I was in this tunnel, but also simultaneously falling down the steps. And the tunnel, I remember being sort of like cloudy. There was lightning in it. It was dark gray clouds, and it was swirling around me in a clockwise fashion, but my body moved in the opposite way as I went. But then I didn't stay in that tunnel. I ended up at the bottom of the steps again, at which point my arm was snapped in half from that fall, which I learned later, but I could tell from the pain that I had hurt my arm. There was blood running down my face by this point. Then I was able to finally get into my bed, and I went to sleep. Now, the people I lived with were away for some time, so what happened then in physical reality is that I lay in my bed in and out of consciousness for 3 days before anybody found me. Um, and it felt like I would wake and sleep. Something about the pain that I had kept me tethered to my body. And a lot of the time I was floating in what I will call sort of an all pink space. The space was pink and it surrounded me. Some people who have NDEs talk about going to like a black void where nothing's happening. They can turn and look in it, but there's nothing there. It was like this, but it was all pink, a soft kind of like baby pink, silky. I was surrounded in this space. Then I would wake up and I would be in pain and then go back to sleep again or back into the other realms. But the pain that I went through from being tossed around, again, it kept me kind of tethered to my body in a way that I don't know if I've heard other NDE experiences quite like this. I think sometimes people pop out and in, but I was very tethered because of the pain in my arm, the pain in my head. But I was also, because of the lidocaine compound, I was not totally present. Then I found myself probably at about like day 2 of this ordeal of not being found by anybody. I was in a meadow, and the meadow was sort of surrounded by trees. I could tell there was a forest around. There were 2 people talking to me, tall blonde people that in this space I knew who they were, but I didn't recognize them from this lifetime or anything. And in this meadow, there were trailers sort of elevated from the ground just by like steps. They weren't like direct to the ground. I remember there being space underneath each of them, kind of like rectangular trailers that people would live in, or I've seen them similar to like schools sometimes have like auxiliary spaces outside where there are additional classrooms, and it was like those structures. And they were pointing to it and they said, well, that technically is your home, but you shouldn't be here right now. We don't know why you're here. You're still in your body. How are you also here? And then I went back to the pink space. And then about a day and a half later, my friends came home. I was found and I was taken to the hospital where they discovered that my arm had been snapped in half. But so that's the totality of that particular NDE. I came back from that with the experience of knowing without knowing that there had been sort of an argument over me, or I wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't my time. It wasn't part of my, I guess people talk about their life contract. Was not part of my contract. I shouldn't have been there. And so there was sort of like a debate on what to do with me on the other side. I came back with this knowing that this had happened, but I didn't experience directly anything that would consciously that I brought back, at least in my memory. So yeah, that's my NDE experience.
Who do you think the figure was that was throwing you around?
It's one of those things, and so much of these experiences bring up questions of maliciousness versus benevolence. And because it was so intense, it took me time to see, and I'm kind of getting the chills now as I'm telling you this. That saved my life because, again, the pain kept me tethered to my body. I would have slipped away if I had just gone to sleep. So I believe that this being was actually keeping me alive, keeping me away from what would have happened to me had I crossed over at that time. Um, it was actually protective, which is very bizarre to me. But that's what feels the truest. I've examined it a lot as I think about it, meditate on it. It definitely was trying to protect me from what would happen if I crossed over at that time.
It's very interesting you say that because I was thinking that somehow you went to another realm and there was some low frequency being attacking you, but I guess I was way off.
Well, that's what I would have thought. Now, I do believe from this experience that a couple things. The tunnel that I went down on my steps, I believe that when I tried to cross over in this way, a portal was opened because experiences continued to happen after that time that weren't really happening prior to that. Other people who lived in the house with me, I continued to live in the house for a number of years. They would see tall, shadowy figures walking up and down the steps. It seemed to be connected to that area. I feel like something opened up then. And I do believe that there at least one malicious entity attached to me as a result of me doing this to myself. Um, Now, the way that this manifests, it seemed to have the ability to enter into other people to cause me suffering and pain. Now, why I say that is because there were certain phrases that would get said by people when I felt like they were under the control of this entity. And I had seen it a couple times. It looked almost like a neuron, the way that I could see it with my physical eye in this reality. The way a neuron has sort of like a roundness, but has spikes with tentacles that come off of it. It was like this, and it sort of would flap, and it's a black hole, I would call it. The entity, I refer to it as a black hole. It flaps a little bit, and it can move really quickly. I've seen it a number of times. One of the times I saw it, I believe it attached to somebody I was living with at that time, who became very violent towards me. I've had a number of people close to me become very violent towards me. I've been held hostage a couple of times. Somebody who tried to drill me shut in a room and use a blowtorch against me anytime I entered the room. Now, it could just be the luck of the draw that I happened to end up living with people who were not well. Um, Also, we've been going through a time in the universe in this world of a shift, I believe. So I think that some of it could be tied to that, but it seems that until I got a handle on what was going on more recently and could set up some psychic protection around myself, this entity was able to enter into people to cause me pain, psychological pain, physical pain, unsafety, trying to get me to get back into a mindset of harming myself. Now, another point that comes up with this, one of the other, I think, recurring themes beyond maliciousness and benevolence is this theme of personal responsibility. Because I also think that in part of my healing process from this, I've had to look at the fact that I made this choice. I chose to take the compound. I chose to end my life at that time. Regardless of why that happened or who was influencing me to do so, I made that choice. These people in my life that did these things to me, they also went with the choice to do so. But I have forgiveness for them because I do believe whatever this black hole that I have witnessed physically with my eyes on 5 occasions since this happened can attach to people and cause them to try to harm me. Another thing that happened after this experience was I got sober for a number of years, alcohol free. Um, and I also feel that if it's not a being that attached to me during this experience, which I believe it is, um, I think when we are inebriated and dissociate often, we're kind of letting beings take a free ride on us. And when I no longer was doing that or in that mindset, whatever it was that used to be able to use me to have fun or whatever it was doing could no longer get into my physical space, couldn't take me on for a free ride. So was trying to get back at me that way through other people. These are thoughts I've had about this. It's just been really the amount of violence that's come towards me from close personal people has been very unusual and bizarre, and really began after I had this encounter, this experience. But don't think that the being that I saw, which was like a dark purple, it had like a clear sort of reflective and sort of shimmery like stars were in it. So I don't know what that being was still, an archangel possibly. But that one, even though it was harming me physically, it was doing it for my own good. It's not the same as this weird kind of psychological torture that has been done to me at the hand of other people since.
Do you think the tall blonde people in the meadow were your guides or people you knew from a past life?
They seemed like people I knew from a past life. They seemed like similar to me. So perhaps formerly human, or they were at least appearing that way. I have to say that that all came in as a very quick flash, um, very dreamlike. And I was in and out of consciousness for those 3 days. So yeah, I still don't, I recognize them though in that moment, like they were people I knew, but no one from this lifetime, and definitely not like Nordic aliens or something. It wasn't like that. They were people, and they weren't really guides because I think they were also living in their own spaces in this meadow. So I still wonder about that. And I have heard other NDEs talk about this meadow that has places where people live. So I think it's a space of some kind that I know other people have been to. It just made me wonder why these barracks and what in this meadow, why what what is that space? I'm not really sure, but they referred to it as I had a home there that I could go to, but now wasn't the time, and that everyone was confused as to why I was there.
So are you saying that they were formerly human? And if so, do you think you were something else before this life?
I think they were formerly human. Yeah, that was the impression I had, or that whatever I am, they were similar to me. um Now that takes us maybe to some other visions I've had. I do work from time to time as a psychic medium, a tarot reader. I have made a living in periods of time um, doing intuitive work. So I have a pretty rich meditative practice. Pretty recently, I was sick with COVID, unfortunately, and the fever just had me hallucinating like you wouldn't believe. But it was more visionary than that. And since having COVID, my psychic abilities have stepped up in the past month or two. They're just stronger. But I had a number of incredibly vivid visions that were in waking time while I had the fever of COVID. Um, and a number of ancient gods appeared to me at that time. Um, Now, I've had recurring dreams for a number of years where I will sort of Google after the fact, like, who was this person? They will give me like very clear identifying markers. Um, the first of which is, I wrote them down so I wouldn't get them wrong, because even though I'm a student of mythology and ancient religions, and I have a degree in anthropology with a focus on comparative religion, so I've studied these things, but each time it's not like it's a god that's obvious or that I would consciously know about. It's always someone where I'm like, oh, that exists for real. So it gets kind of exciting, this part,
Yeah.
because it sort of confirms just that I'm tapping into something or other. And it's always gods, which is very strange to me, um, because I have a skeptic slash atheistic side, or I see religion as a metaphor or something, but perhaps there is some force that is real. So at any rate, the first time this happened, a goddess who is known as Dhumavati, who is a Hindu goddess. She is a goddess of crows and plagues. She warned me about the COVID pandemic in a dream. I had a dream about her. I was helping her put a dress on. She just gave me these very specific identifying markers so that I could go look her up later. And it's the goddess of plagues. Now, at the end of that dream, it seemed like we were preparing for some kind of wedding. She said to me, "I'll be back for your wedding." And then she hopped on a very small UFO and we all waved at her. For some reason in this dream, we were in Paris and we like waved at her as she flew away. This was just a dream, but I looked it all up, and I still am worried about that. So if anyone ever marries me, we better watch out. But so that was the first time that had happened. But more recently, I had very powerful visionary waking experience. The first god that stepped in um, was ancient Egyptian and had a housefly as its head. And I looked this up, and this god, I don't know how to pronounce it, Uatchit, Uatchit. It's a god of protection and success and good luck. Um, so he stepped in very clearly. And then as he stepped in, there was also this woman, and she had a stick over her shoulder, and she kept showing me her nails. She kept pointing out how her nails were very beautiful and that she prides herself on her nails. And she handed me a couple pearls, and she said, "You're going to need these. This is an awaking vision, not a dream." And handed to me. I was laying in the bed in a fever. She like sort of placed these pearls on me and said, "You're going to need these. I'm giving these to you. These protect from bad births." That's what she said. Um, Now I looked her up, and there is an ancient Chinese goddess who happens to be the goddess of hemp and marijuana, and her name is Magu, Magu, and is definitely 100% who this being was. She kept pointing out the nails. It's like a very important part of her story. Um, Now, in meditative practice, I've used these pearls as protection. I squeeze them between my fingers, they create a smoke around me, and it helps me to not be seen by beings that want to harm me. So finally, I have some kind of protection. And since I've started working more with these beings that showed up while I had COVID in my meditative practice, the nefarious energy coming through other people at me has lessened very strongly. So, part of, I think, my intention of coming and talking about this is for other people out there who are starting to dabble with psychic abilities, starting to want to astral travel or connect maybe as channelers to other beings. It's very, very important. And maybe a lot of people will say, yeah, duh, it goes without saying, but it's very important to set an intention of protection for yourself. It's very important to set an intention of clarity, because another thing that is a recurring theme of this is, are these beings who talk to you from the other side telling you the truth? Are they playing games with you? Are they purposely manipulating your perception? So to know the difference between connecting with a being, one, am I connecting with a part of my mind that's tricking myself? Am I connecting with a being that wants to trick me for whatever reason? Or am I really connecting with someone from the outside, whether it be a loved one of a client who has hired me to make contact, or one of my own loved ones? So there needs to be sort of a rigorous mental practice for people that are working with the other side to be sure that you're not interacting with someone who is not what they say they are, or who has some sort of negative intention for you. So these visions that I had with these gods that came through recently because of COVID have sort of like increased my conscious awareness of protecting myself, not inviting every single entity in the whole entire world to the party, um, and to be clear about what your intentions are for tapping into the other side, and why you want to be there and who you want to connect with, and for what reasons.
Well, what is your process to determine who's good and who's not?
You ask again, and then you ask again. Um, Sort of clarifying questions help. One of the things that happened after I tried to take my own life is, the day I got out of the hospital from the being treated for my snapped ulna, my arm that snapped in half. I discovered that my best friend had taken her life at the same time. Um, Now this is one of the things there's survivor's guilt that can happen. Um, and I've never really stopped blaming myself for that happening to her. Um, Part of me thinks that perhaps she offered herself in my place. Um, as awful as that sounds and as terrible as that is, I try not to torture myself with that thought. But because of how that all played out, I really started to call out to her a lot because we talked every day. She's my best friend since I was 17 years old. And this encounter happened, the experience of me trying to cross over was in 2018, so not too long ago. But since then, I've really been trying to contact her essence. Um, and there are beings when I do that who come through and they can try to be as convincing as possible, but they're not her. They're just hearing my distress signal, so to speak, and trying to come in and talk, or take a ride on me or whatever. So having clarifying questions that only she would really know, or I have my little ways now of clarifying if it's her or not. And she's gotten clearer and clearer too as the time has progressed. Um, so yeah, you have to have a rigorous sort of like set of questions, a way of differentiating that's probably different for each person of what's a thought in my head, what is an actual external voice coming in. Um, it's very important to get grounded in the beginning. So I do a lot of work of staying in my root chakra, putting my feet on the ground, having something that keeps me tethered to my body, so that as I'm going, I can touch back into to reality to differentiate between these things. But yeah, sort of asking a few times for the entity that you believe you're connecting with to repeat itself. Um, I find that if they're not what you think you're connecting with, it either stops talking altogether, it gets bored with that line of reasoning, or it'll get upset and show itself, sort of.
After your NDE, did you note that you had any new abilities?
My intuition is a lot stronger, and for a couple years that was frightening, and I didn't really know how to process it. I didn't even notice that that's what it was until probably more recently, as I've gotten some distance from that emotionally and psychologically. It's really just that my I'll call it my universal hearing is a lot stronger. The voices are a lot clearer since that happened. Um, Now, my clairvoyance sort of works in this way that is already one of the least reliable ways, according to the community, in that it is auditory. I hear voices. I do see images as well, and those are always really nice because then it's doubly confirming. But for the most part, my mediumship is through clairaudience. Um, so it does take a lot of really confirming, did I hear that right? Is that a thought in my head or is that somebody else? Um, so it just takes rigor.
You mentioned earlier that those tall blonde people weren't aliens. Have you had any alien contact?
I actually have, and it's funny, until I had the visions that I had recently under COVID with these ancient Egyptian and Sumerian gods appearing to me, I didn't think about it that way. I thought it was a dream, or I thought it was an elemental being or something else. But when these ancient gods more recently started showing themselves in waking visions, I began to really research ancient Sumeria. Now, another thing that I'll throw in here now is that when these gods were appearing to me, Magu, who was giving me the pearls, they kept saying to me, "You're part of the pantheon." And that was one of the ones where I was like, "That's my brain," whatever. So I kept asking them to repeat that, and they said, "No, you're part of the pantheon." And I asked them for other details, and metaphor or archetype or whatever, these beings recently were trying to show me that I am an incarnation of the Greek god Apollo, and that I'm in exile because of my actions as Apollo. and that this is a lifetime for me to learn about non-competitiveness in creativity. And I'm in exile here because of my actions as Apollo. Now, that is something that it was another one where I was like, "Really?" So I keep meditating on it, I keep getting the same messages, um, coincidences keep confirming that there's some truth to that, so I don't know what to do with that, but, the more I learned about it, I don't think it's, like, me bragging to say so because I have a lot to learn, I think, as a result of if that is true, I'm here to make amends. So I have work to do. It's not really like a gift.
Well, what do you think that you did wrong that made you deserve this punishment?
Well, what's really funny is when in my research, I came across a story about Apollo and the fawn, or I forget the term, but half man, half goat fawn, right?
Gosh, I think we just talked about that recently, and I can't remember what that's called.
I can't remember either, but our viewers will know.
Yes, somebody
so
will probably put it in the description below.
so Apollo was threatened by this fawn named Marzius. And my last name is Marsh, my birth name, and I have shortened it to Mars. I always joke that I've taken the silencer off. So I'm Empress Mars. But so Apollo got into a competition with the faun Marsyas and was so jealous of his skills as a musician that he flayed him alive. And um, so then I also double checked with these gods that have been talking to me. Are you sure I'm not Marsyas? Because I'm Mars, you know? But that was all by design because I'm also here to learn a lot about compassion. So I think that I appear in this life similar to how that fawn would have looked. So Apollo is having to basically live the life of one of the people that he harmed, and that's where I'm at. In my progression as a spiritual human being in this lifetime.
That's interesting because you are also a musician.
Yes.
And so how that ties back into it again.
And I have a real bee in my bonnet about competitiveness. I think where we are right now, just in terms of everybody's so worried about algorithms, views, um, creating content, where their content's going to be seen. And it always really bugs me because I feel like there's enough to go around. And also, the process of creation is kind of similar to the process of being a psychic medium or a channel. You try to get your ego out of the way so that you can discover new forms and discover new beauty and discover healing that is needed for the ego and the conscious mind. And the only way that you can get to those places is by stepping out of what you think is true and sort of get into the beginner's mind. So it's funny that in this lifetime, I'm pretty obsessed with competitiveness, and it turns me off, or trying not to operate from that space myself. So a lot of this stuff sort of tracked, whether it's a metaphor or an archetype, or I am actually an incarnation of a god. Um, but if that is the case, then in my meditative practice, I have been trying to use the gifts of Apollo to create protection for the planet, to envision shields around Earth that would protect us from nefarious connections, shields around people that I interact with. So whatever that black hole is can't attach to them and make them do things they don't want to do. So I've really come a long way recently with being rigorous about protection, being rigorous about what my intention is.
Your name is Empress Mars. Is that your stage name? And if people want to find your music, is that how they look you up?
So the project that I have is called Settled Arrows, SETTLEDARROWS, Settled Arrows. Um, which I chose before I knew this Apollo thing, so the arrows thing lines up. So that's the project I have. I'll send you some links. They can find my Bandcamp. We are actually just about to put out an album called Nectar, and this album is very important for me because I really got conscious about trying to heal the rifts in my life and protect and heal from the darkness that I've been experiencing. And I think that there is a lot of beautiful healing available in that music. So I do hope that your viewers will seek that out. And that is coming out in September. It should be out by September 20th. Uh, so people who are interested in music that can soothe and heal their spiritual journey, um, hopefully will find this and enjoy it.
That's great. If we get back to aliens, you mentioned these dreams of Sumeria and stuff, but what about seeing a UFO or an ET in real life?
So this would have happened in 2023. And at that time, I was sober. So I was not drinking. I was not doing any kind of drugs. I was working out a lot, walking. I was in a very healthy chemical, physical, biological space. I was just in a very healthy mindset. I woke up one day. It must have been about 11 in the morning. I work the night shift, so that's early for me. So I was just waking up to check my cell phone that I had by the bed just to see what time it was. I had the phone in my hand, and so I saw the timestamp, and then I noticed that there was somebody standing above me. And it was during the day, 11 a.m. It was a sunny day. It was bright enough. Definitely a person, um, approximately 5'10", standing above my bed. This figure had a robe on. It was like a white robe, but it had, I don't know if they had like a scarf similar to this, but it was like there's orange and gold in there as well. So the robe had sort of like, there were layers to it. Orange with gold threads and white. And they were bald, slightly larger head than a normal person. Their ears were slightly pointy, not totally elven, but slightly pointy. Large eyes, but humanoid, not the black reflective eyes that you would think of for an alien. Humanoid eyes. Palish skin, and actually I can see that there's like a grayness to the skin, but only slight. Mostly just normal human looking, pale, larger head, slightly larger eyes, slightly pointy ears. It was leaning over my torso to examine, I think, something, or to look for something. Still, I'm not quite sure what. And when I noticed it, it noticed me, and it was kind of like surprised, like that it could. I still remember its expression very clearly. Very surprised that I could see him. He moves his hands like so, kind of waved them in my direction, made one hand in my direction, and I fell back to sleep. I got very, very drowsy, and I fell asleep. My internal clock tells me that fell asleep for about 3.5 hours, something like that, like a long period of time. I went back to sleep, and then I woke up again and was like, "Oh, that person was here," but that there was nobody there at that point. And I checked my clock again, and it only had been 2 minutes since I last checked the phone. Um, but my feeling is that I slept for hours. Um, so that's a very brief encounter. I didn't really think much about it. I thought perhaps it was a dream. But it can't be if I saw the phone timestamp and it was correct. It just was, it was definitely 100% real. Um, and I didn't think anything of it, but once I've been having these gods appear to me more recently, and again, those aren't dreams, those are waking visions. So they're vivid, they're real, they dream like, but they were definitely when I was awake. I was not asleep when these gods were appearing to me. It started me researching a lot ancient Sumerian culture, which then got me onto like the stories about Enki, these old possibly true stories of intergalactic travelers. Um, and then I found a website that has sort of made these, I think they're AI videos that are encyclopedias of each type of species of alien. And I just was sort of like looking through it. Um, and one episode features what are known as Sasani. And that is a term some people use for what they think are gray human hybrids, which makes sense because this was sort of pale grayish skin, um, seems to be able to manipulate time and my perception because it was able to make me fall asleep and lose and sort of have this sense of a prolonged period of time with only a minute or two passing, which some people I guess attribute to grays. So that's what I believe it was. And when I saw that episode, it kind of hit me in my gut, and I was like, "Oh, that's what that was." Um, and at the time, I was also using this app where it's like a ghost hunter app where you can it turns some kind of frequency into words, phrases usually one at a time. And so because we had been having a lot of poltergeist activity in the house, as I said, after I tried to take my life, there were just a lot of objects that would move, people seeing things. So I sort of just got interested in seeing what I could get. And there was seemed to be a spirit living in the house that was an older woman who had lived there in the 1900s. And I got some information from her that I could kind of confirm, but she started to say, "You're not alone. There's a hybrid." And I also had forgotten that that came through that machine app. Um, and you take those things with a pinch of salt sometimes because I don't think our cell phones are equipped to pick up this frequency. So why would the app? The skeptical part of my brain is like, "What is this? It must be pre-programmed words, just like thrown in to make me think things." But there were sometimes information would come through where it seemed like, "Oh, maybe I am connecting with something here." And whatever that spirit was that lived in the house was letting me know there was a hybrid around. So perhaps when I hurt myself, it opened a doorway that allowed beings to come through. Um, Now, at that time too, I had been through an experience of betrayal in the art world, and I had been praying to God or something for justice because what was done to me is illegal in America, or is illegal everywhere except for America. So this thing that was done to me, there was going to be no justice or no recourse for me. And so I just was praying for justice, and something not possessed literally, but something came through in my dreams. I was just so upset that I didn't know who to reach out to. So I had put a call out to the Intergalactic Council for justice. And I had said, they really hurt me. Um, Please, anybody help. Intergalactic Council, step in. I need help. So I also wonder if I called out to the Intergalactic Council and they sent an envoy to scope out what was going on with me. Um, I still don't really understand why it was looking over my torso, though. It wasn't at my head. It was leaning over my stomach. And why I thought it was a dream was it sort of resembled the head shape, um, the character of Nosferatu, which we talk about. So um, but at the same time, I didn't get a malicious intention from this being. It was really more just like on a routine mission vibe. That's the vibe I got from it. It was like just scoping things out, the way like a nurse would at a triage clinic or something. It felt like that. So I still don't really understand what its intention was for me, why it was there. Very brief encounter, um, or one that I'm not consciously able to access. If it lasted longer than that moment, I don't know what happened after that.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
That would be great, yes. Also, if anybody has encountered a being like this in robes, humanoid but slightly gray, human-sized, I would love to commiserate with other people that have experienced this because I still am just curious about what their intentions might be. So yes, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to.
What's the best way to contact you?
So they can reach out to me at settledarrows@gmail.com, and I'll share that with you so you can link in your video as well.
Besides your new music, do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Well, I've been working very hard to be disciplined around my mediumship abilities and tarot reading, intuitive counseling. Um, I have given that up to the universe that the people who need me will find me. So people might see this and feel drawn to me for that reason, and I'm open to that as well. So I have been working hard on getting my space and energy clear so that I can be of service to people.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yes. Another recurring theme that comes up a lot in these issues of NDE, alien encounters, is whether or not we are enslaved or inhibited by these beings. It is my firm belief that we are actually very lucky to be human. We can access the other dimensions from our physical bodies. This is a rare thing in the universe of creatures who are sentient in the way that we are. So humans should take comfort in the fact that we have access and that we are able to grow as individuals. This is a blessing. This is a gift. This makes us powerful in the universe. So I would also like to suggest that if you are a psychic or a channeler who feels that aliens are encountering you in a way that is harmful to you, and you want them to leave you alone psychically, just tell them, ask them if they can remove themselves from the collective and see what happens. I will tell you that that's been effective for me in getting what I feel like are less than noble intended psychic aliens to leave my space. Now, maybe that's a little bit rude to those beings, but what they want to do to you is probably ruder than that. So I would say just tell them, that's nice, but can you free yourself from the collective? I just want all humans to know that we are safe and that we have very amazing abilities of growth and transformation that are a rare and precious gift.
Empress, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for your podcast. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.